What's up, guys? Marcellus Williams, aka TheSwolefessor, here to educate you on health, fitness, social well-being. As this workout footage from last week is playing, I want to explain to you guys the relationship and the importance of exertion with total workload. As far as, does it matter? How much does it matter? Do we have to train high exertions in order to progress? Because there's a lot of confusion on this topic. I've come to realize, like this year especially, just as I've been talking to people and talking to newer clients, that there's a lot of confusion on how all this stuff works together. Because okay, on one end, you have people say that total workload done is the only thing that matters, right? Quality, volume, and when it comes to like muscle growth and therefore progression, right? Which is sets times reps times weight. But then you have other people saying like, no, only hard sets are what matter, right? And I've even done a video over that. Explain the concept behind hard sets. And what I explained to you guys is that it's a middle ground. It's the fact that total workload done is what matters as far as sets times reps times weight. That is total workload done. That is your volume, but only within the context of hard sets, meaning that the total tonnage does matter, but only if the set done was hard enough to, stimulate some type of adaptation. But with that being said, does that mean that, okay, so then I have to do like RP 8s, 9s, or RP 7s? So I always have to be within a few reps of failure in order to get growth from a set. And that's where the confusion is coming in. So hopefully I can break this down for you guys and make it just a little bit clearer. So the first thing we need to understand, guys, is what is exertion, right? Like the actual definition of exertion is like, we can look at it as like just physical effort or the application of force, right? Which means that no matter what, no matter how heavy or how light you're lifting, there is always exertion. If you lift a 45-pound bar on bench press, squat, deadlift, whatever, there is exertion because you had to apply some type of force in order to move that weight, right? So that's the first thing we need to keep in mind and understand. That even though, yes, we look at RP like on a scale like 1 to 10, that there is always exertion. If you're lifting weights, there is exertion. In the same way that if you're lifting any type of weight, there is workload, right? Even if you only lift the 45-pound bar, once again, for one rep, that is still workload done. It was one set, one rep with 45 pounds, right? And there's your tonnage. Now, the reason that, the whole idea of like, hard sets and like, tracking hard sets came about is for two reasons. One, it's a lot easier to kind of track your total weekly volume that you're doing if you look at it from the standpoint of how many total sets you're doing, versus if you're trying to calculate everything out by tonnage, by just weight times sets times reps. The second thing is the fact that a lot of people take that to a weird extreme where they actually will count like, oh, I did this much tonnage of work, and they're counting their warm-up sets. They're counting that warm-up set of 5 they did with 135 pounds, even though that set did not elicit any growth for them. Like if you're a 500-pound squatter, then doing one set of 5 with 135 pounds as a warm-up is not eliciting any type of growth for you, right? We already know that, we understand that. With that being said, the idea that you have to train high exertions in order to get growth from set simply is not true. You guys already hopefully know by now, if you've been with the channel for a while, you've already heard me explain that you don't ever have to train to failure in order to make progress, right? Like even when we do a 1 rep max in powerlifting, that is to demonstrate where our strength is. It's not so much for building strength. Not to say that you're not going to get any type of growth or adaptation or stimulus from like, doing a heavy single, because if you're doing a heavy single that's a high exertion single, then you're hitting those upper threshold muscle fibers, right? Like that 90% or so. But that doesn't mean that's an optimal way to go about building. Meaning like if you had the choice of hitting like, a single at, RP 10 versus doing like a 3x8 and maybe each set feels like an RP 7, you're gonna get more growth from that 3x8 where each set feels like an RP 7. Even though the exertion is lower, you're doing more total workload than what you did with just that single, right? Which is why with bodybuilders, they tend to focus on what? Getting more sets in, more reps. Not that they don't lift heavy, but doing a bunch of singles is not their main priority because they're focused on building, right? More than anything else, building muscle. And for us, when we're doing our singles, that's kind of like to practice and to get better at utilizing that muscle for 1 rep maxes, right? Because we know that muscle and strength go hand in hand. As we work out with quality volume, our body grows and builds muscle in response to it, and therefore we're able to exert more force because we have more muscle, and that's, our strength going up, correct? So we understand that. But this idea that, okay, because exertion is involved and because, we have to be training hard enough in order to grow, we always have to do RP 8s and 9s, simply isn't the case. The reality is if you are gradually doing more workload over time, sets times reps times weight, that's going up over time, then you are going to grow from that. You're going to gain muscle from that. The reality is though, is that if you're doing like a really, really light weight, right? You can grow from that. But at that point, then you have to take it close to failure. Like for example, if I have 135 pounds on my back, if I'm really trying to get any growth from that from squatting, I will have to take it close to failure, because I'll have to do enough reps with that lighter weight to where those upper threshold muscle fibers are actually getting some type of stimulus, and therefore some type of adaptation will take place. So it's simply more practical and realistic if I instead don't just try to increase reps endlessly with the same weight, or don't just try to increase sets endlessly, because that's just not good time management. It's just not very practical. It makes more sense to manipulate all these things, the sets, the reps, and the weight, seeing all these things gradually go up, especially the weight, right? Because nobody wants to get to the point where you're necessarily doing like 10 sets of 10 all the time, or 3 sets of 100, right? It just makes more sense that if that weight on the bar is going up, then it's a lot easier to manipulate the sets and reps as well in a way that systematically makes sense for doing more workload over time. With that being said, it doesn't ever have to necessarily be like an RP 8 or 9. If you guys even look at the way that my programming is, I'll maybe hit a RP 8 or 9 top set like in like the final week of a block. So does that mean that in that entire block that I did, I'm only getting growth from everything that I did that final week? No, because then that would be a waste of time. That meant that I was just filling my thumbs the previous 3 weeks. And even with my back down sets after the top set, right? More often than not, that last set feels like, you know, an RP 7, 7.5. Like during that final week, it might feel more like an RP 8, just as like the back down loads are getting heavier. But more often than not, it's not that high exertion. So that's the thing you guys have to keep in mind and understand. It's also important to understand that even if exertions are equal, that doesn't mean that the sets are equal, right? Like, and this is where, like I said, total workload as far as tonnage does matter just from the context of hard sets. Meaning, if I do a set of 5 with 305 pounds, right, and it feels like an RP 7, versus another set of 5 with 315 pounds, and let's say that also feels like an RP 7, even though I may track those hard sets similarly, I still technically did more work with the 315 pounds, which means that I'm gonna get a little bit more growth from that than what I did with the 300 pounds, right? So it's also important to keep in mind that even times where you may have higher exertions, that doesn't mean that you're doing more workload. Like if you do 3 sets of 10 with 300 pounds, right, and it felt like an RP 7 by that last set, then the following week, maybe you got really poor sleep, maybe you went out and drank a lot, whatever it may be, you do 285 pounds for 3 sets of 10, and by the last set it felt like an RP 8 or 9 just because you felt more beat up. Just because the exertion went up doesn't mean that you did more workload or going to get more growth than what you did from doing objectively more workload the week before. So that's what's important to understand, guys. It's not that exertion doesn't matter. It's not that there aren't times where you should push it. It's just, it's not the end all be all of everything. And it's understanding that realistically speaking, even if you're not tracking your RPs, right, you're just tracking like your sets, reps, and weight, and you're doing more over time. Realistically speaking, as you keep going up with any decent set or rep range, the RPEs are gonna be anywhere probably between like, you know, that 6 to 8 RPE anyway. Even if you're not trying to push for RP 9s and 10s, very rarely are you gonna do a 3 sets of 10 or a 5x5 or whatever it is with any given percentage that makes sense for that set and rep range, and it feel like it's going to feel like an RP 5 or less. Very rarely is that ever going to happen, especially if you have your day set up to where like your heavier days are early in the week and your lighter days are later in the week. Then even those lighter days where the weight's objectively a little bit lighter is still going to feel like probably a relatively higher exertion, like I said, anywhere from like a 6 to 8, just because you're more fatigued later in the week. So that's why it ultimately comes down to, are you doing more over time? That is what's going to determine your growth. Not saying that's even the most optimal way of going about it. Not saying that you should just avoid RP 8 and 9 sets. I'm not saying that. There's a time to push, there's a time to overreach, and you can get even more benefit from that. I could even make the argument that if you systematically know when to push for higher exertions, that's going to be faster growth and more efficient growth than if you're always training kind of on the lower end of exertion. But it's just understanding that it's not a necessity. It's not going to make or break you, especially for those of you where you're more focused on general strength training anyway, and not necessarily powerlifting. Don't feel like you have to be pushing your exertions that high that often, because the reality is you don't. So hopefully this made sense. Hopefully this breakdown, like, you know, clear things up for some of you guys. If not, you already know, just leave your question in the comment down below. But that's it for the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, go ahead and leave a comment down below, let me know what you did. If not, leave a comment down below, let me know what I can do better. Like the video, share, subscribe. Keep it simple, specific, scientific, and I'll catch you guys later.